Hey everybody, how's it going? So we're going to try to get started more or less on time here. Yeah, I called it testify because I was thinking about all those if-I modules that Node.js people have made, like browserify and stuff like that, and I was like, oh, testify, it's actually a word. Okay, Tara's telling me that there's something loud on the stream. It might actually be the fan on my computer. Let me check on there real fast. Let's see here. Yeah, the live streaming software eats up a lot of cycles, so we're gonna have to deal with a little fan noise. It might be, I could put in headphones. What do you think? Should I put in headphones?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Right. Maybe that'll help. Get back to our agenda view. There we go. Okay, now I just need to mute the video so I don't have to listen to myself. There we go. All right. Yeah. Tara tells me that sounds better, so that's good. Okay, Tara, what do you think? Should we get started now, or should we give people a little more time?
Let's do it.
All right. Welcome to the weekly live stream. Really glad to have everybody here. Today I'm going to be talking about ES modules, which is the new module system that JavaScript has integrated to be sort of native to the language. There's a lot of history with modules in JavaScript thanks to Node.js. And if I pop out of here and bring up some of the tabs I had ready here. So a lot of folks are familiar with this. This is the kind of the old school way, you might say, of doing modules. This is what Node.js did, where you have this exports object and it sort of represents the file that you are working on, or the module that you're working on, and you can attach functions and variables and things like that to this exports object. And then somebody else can require the file, and they'll basically get whatever that exports object is. And that's worked really well for Node.js, but folks were not really sure if that was the right approach for the web. And actually this has been kind of contentious because the export tools that ES modules use, they're not very compatible with the Node.js module system. But that's what we have now. So that here we have the new ES modules, right? With this new keyword, rather than this exports object, we just have an export keyword. And so now whenever you want to export a variable or a function out of a file, you just use this export keyword, and then somewhere else you use this import keyword, and you can pull in the content through that, right? Now, the Node.js modules were designed to interact with the Node.js ecosystem. So there are a couple of built-in modules that come kind of like along with Node.js. It's like FS for the file system. There's an HTTP module. These are what you call the built-ins, and then there's npm. And npm makes it possible to publish modules under a pretty short name. And then you can install those modules under the node modules directory, and now you can just do a require whatever. So let me open up a text buffer here. So you can do requests is the name of the module, right? Let me get the syntax highlighting on here. Just like that, you've got this requests module that you can import out of npm by installing requests. It's really handy. Okay, well, that's really node-centric. You have to have this file system to be loading these short-named modules off of. You got to do the npm install step. And ES modules are mainly designed to be good with the web. So how does it work on the web? Well, that's sort of an interesting question. The way that you import a local file in Node.js would be like, let's say I'm in this folder here. I would do like require errors. Okay, that's a local folder or local file import. In ES modules, I might do something like, okay, so that's relatively similar. But now we're talking about the global module registry, right? NPM. Well, there's no NPM on the web. But what you do have on the web is web domains, right? So rather than doing something like var requests equals require and then just requests, instead what we're going to want to do is like import requests from, and then this would be, let's say, https requests module.com index.js, right? And so what we're doing here is we're just using the web as our module publishing system. Kind of straightforward. And people are starting to kind of begin to do this. But I think it's fair to say that ES modules are still really just getting started, and we're still kind of finding out what ecosystem is going to be built up around this. I haven't yet seen anybody say, you know what, I'm totally ready to just switch from NPM to the web. But what's been interesting lately is that I've been doing more building inside of userland of Beaker, right? Because the tools are coming together, and so I've been writing a couple of apps. And if you've been seeing some of the other live streams I've done, you would know that I've had this rule, which is got to stay 100% vanilla JavaScript, right? I don't want to use frameworks. I don't want to use build steps. I only want to use libraries that I write or that are native to the ecosystem of Beaker and DAT. And that means that I actually, because I can't do a build step, I can't access the NPM ecosystem. I can't use code that uses this style of module require, because if I wanted to do that, I would have to use a build step, which would be like Browserify or Webpack or something. The only module system that I can use if I'm using straight vanilla is these ES modules, right? So that pushed me to start to explore, okay, so what does it feel like to use ES modules inside of the DAT and Beaker ecosystem? And well, the answer is that, first of all, you're going to use DAT URLs instead of HTTP URLs. So it's like this same thing before, but DAT instead of HTTP. This is pretty nice, actually, because DAT has much better semantics for publishing modules than HTTP does. HTTP, you know, it's designed to connect you to a specific endpoint, to a specific server. DAT is designed to give you access to some files that have been signed by a public key. And so you're getting integrity checks and code signing automatically whenever you're using the DAT protocol, which is pretty sweet. You're also getting some better caching characteristics than HTTP can do, because with HTTP, you would have to ping the server to find out if you have the latest thing, and that can be relatively fast. But on DAT, you can sit in the swarm and you will automatically get updates when they happen, which means that you will either have the most recent version or let me think. You'll probably have the most recent version, and you don't need to ping the network whenever you do an import. You'll either have it, and so you can go ahead and load it, or if you don't have it in your local cache yet, then you download it. But since you're staying on the network in the swarm, pulling down the latest version of a file, if you've got this DAT site saved, you're going to have the latest version and you don't have to hit the network at all. The performance of ES modules, that I'm not going to say that it's going to be like some kind of sweet benefit over HTTP, because we have to basically do all the imports at runtime instead of doing any pre-bundling. But it still has some interesting features on the front. And Eric Rangel pointed out something totally accurate too. You get versioning and redundancy. Now we're still working on the versioning aspects of DAT, so that has a little bit of growth to do. But the way it works right now in DAT, you have an address, let's say beakerbrowser.com. Every DAT has a log, kind of like how Git has a log. It's a log of changes. And the way it works in DAT is that every time you change a file, either because you're writing the file or you're deleting the file, a new entry is added to the log. So it's kind of like entry number 1, write index.html. Entry number 2, write styles.css. Entry number 3, I made a change to index.html, so we write index.html again. Okay, so this is like our log behind the beakerbrowser.com DAT site. So if I want to reference a specific version of the Beaker browser website, I just need to know which number I'm interested in seeing, right? 1, 2, or 3. And so then you put a plus sign at the end of the domain, and then let's say I want to access the, v2, I put a 2 there. And just like that, I'm accessing now an earlier version of the site. So like index.html would be this version. So here's, actually, why don't we do this, right? So very directly, if I want to access the v1 version of index.html, I put this 1. If I want to get the v3 version, I put this 3, or I just say, give me the latest, right? So versioning is built directly into it as well. And over time, I think, I mentioned that it's not very mature. We are going to have to get more sophisticated version numbers when we add multi-writer, which is probably somewhere around 6 months in the future. And then I'd like to have version tags at some point so that I could say, rather than using these sort of internal log numbers, I'd like to have the ability to say like v1.0.0, right? Because I tagged it, that's v1.0.0, and then other people can point directly at that tag. So, we'll get there eventually, but you get the sort of the really simple versioning already. And it is actually really useful. Because if somebody is just writing, doing dev work and writing directly to the latest, and you want to use their module, you might want to just pin the version so that you know which version of the code you're using. Yeah, so that's good stuff. We're also talking about adding a version tag which includes a content hash in it. So that'll be something like, it would be, I think we're talking about it making it behind another plus, so it'd be like +1 plus, and then DA223, whatever that hash is going to be in hex, right? And that way, what we're calling that is a strong link. And that way, if beakerbrowser.com ever got changed to a different DAT internally, even though those version numbers will change, we can check against the hash and make sure that it's the version you expect. So yeah, we're calling that a strong link, and not sure when that's going to come along, but most of the internal code is there for that, and it's really just something that we need to get implemented. Cedric asked, you think it'll take another 6 months to get DAT multi-writer? I don't know. I mean, predictions on timelines are always ridiculous. But I think it might take that amount of time. It's the kind of thing where we know it's really important, but we want to get some of the basic tooling right first and then get multi-writer in. But a lot of the core dev work has been done, so I don't know. Hopefully not too long. Okay, so here we go, right? We got all this ES module stuff, which is pretty great. why don't we get into a little bit of building on it and seeing what it's like in actual use. So to do that, we need a good project, something to be doing with our time. I figure what a fun thing might be to do is to make a little API, a module for running a blog on a DAT website. So this is the blog API that I'm kind of thinking about doing. Really simple. It's almost like, almost like a CRUD interface, right? It's like a list of blog entries. You can add a post. You can list the post, get a post, remove a post, right? Create, read, update, delete. It's a CRUD interface. So imagine, let's say I have a DAT site. Here's the root folder. I want to have a blog folder. Under the blog folder, I want to have, let's make them JSON files, every blog entry. And it's going to be like the slug of the entry, so like hello world is the slug of the blog post, .json. And that's how the blog posts are going to be read and written. So how, oh, hit Control H, my bad. That's another blog post, right? So it's just a listing of JSON files inside of the blog folder, okay? This is relatively simple to do in DAT because the main interface in DAT right now is the DAT archive, which is basically a files archive. It's like a little file system. So here I created a reference to the site that I'm on, and if I did something like dat.readDear blog, I'd be getting that listing of JSON files under the blog folder, right? If I wanted to post something to the blog, let's see, slug. I don't need to write slug. I'll do. Okay, so that's the code right there that I need to make a new post, right? Okay, so pretty straightforward stuff. But let's say I wanted to have this API that wraps around the data archive and sort of automates it for me. Well, that's the module we're going to make today. And we're also going to write a couple of tests for the module using Testify, which is something I put together recently because I needed a test runner inside of Beaker. So now we got one. So let's get kicking here. All right. I'm on the latest released version of Beaker. I'm going to create a new empty site. And I'm going to name it blog module. Give myself a local directory to work from. All right, so there that is. Why don't I copy that path real quick and open it up in Sublime. Moritz is saying he's curious to see what possibilities multi-writer offers. He says he thinks it will be getting awesome to create new projects with it. I strongly agree with you, and I really can't wait for multi-writer to come in. I just want to make sure we get the basics first, but once multi-writer lands, we'll be able to have multiple devices able to collaborate on a single DAT. I think that's going to be really important, both for collaboration between people, but also for being able to have, you know, mobile and desktop working together so that I can have a profile site and still access and read and write to that profile site from all my devices. So multi-writer is really important, and that's part of the reasons why I've been sort of wanting to take our time with it. I want to make sure we get it right. But the other thing that, if you're interested in seeing what I think could be really exciting, and actually sort of relates to this, but I'm not going to talk about it too much today, is this idea of symlinks, or sometimes we're calling them mounts. Being able to mount one DAT as a subfolder of other DATs also could be really cool. Okay, so we're on our blog module here. Now let's, in the current version of Beaker, whenever you set a local folder, it just automatically synchronizes, which we're calling, we may not land on this, but we've been calling it calling it auto publish mode, right? So any change I make to the local files, it's just going to publish them right away. And so if I go to the DAT site here, this is the one we just created. I'm going to turn on live reloading because it's fun. And I'm going to write an index.html real fast. Actually, why don't I do an index.markdown, because this is a module and nobody wants to write HTML for their module. They just want to write markdown. So index.markdown. And give it a sec. There we go. Okay. And let's grab that interface. Got to make sure we document everything well. Okay, so now we have an index.markdown for our site. So if somebody lands on the blog module DAT site, they'll be presented with some documentation. Let's take it one step further. Let's get Hashbase involved here, because I want to have a nice URL for my blog module. So I'm going to upload this to Hashbase. One of many ways you can get a nice URL, but it's a good one. And I'm just going to call it Paul's blog module.hashbase.io. Should update pretty quick. Okay, and now when I jump over to Beaker, I should be able to go to Paul's blog module.hashbase.io. Okay, there we go, right? So there's not much to my module yet, but technically I've published it. And I wanted to do that first because I wanted to update my README to reflect this. Okay. Let's refresh. All right, right there. That is how people will be able to import my blog module from the DAT network. DAT Paul's-blog-module.hashbase.io is where it is published now. And so whenever somebody wants to use it, that's how they will get the code. Okay. Pretty straightforward, so let's get started with that index.js. Jim's just giving us an update there in the chat about his work on the multi-writer support. Glad to hear that's going well, Jim. Okay, I'm gonna copy this real fast. Now, one way to do this, it's going to be the blog module class. The way I've been doing this in some of my own work lately is I've just been extending the DAT archive object, which is pretty cool. So let's just do it here. You've got to make sure you call the super constructor. And then, let's see, well, let's just write out all of our function signatures real fast. Okay, that's done. So now we got the shape of our interface. Probably going to be more functions added as we go, but that's the basics. Let's go ahead and write a quick blog post validator. That's an important thing to do, to make sure that whenever somebody posts, calls the post function, I want to make sure that the object fits the schema that I want to have inside of the posts folder. So let's write a function that'll do that. Now here's my sort of what I'm going off of. I want to have a slug attribute, a title attribute, a content attribute, and a date attribute. Okay, I'm going to throw together a quick assert function. And I'm going to do assert that post is truthy and it's an object. And I'm going to assert that the type of post.slug is a string. And let's do a truthy check on that as well. And that's going to be the same for both title and content. And then date is also similar, except it needs to be a number. All right, that's our validator. Great. So now the first thing we do in the post call is validate the blog post that's given to us. Next thing we ought to do is make sure that the we ought to make sure that the blog folder exists anytime we're going to make a post. So I'm going to write a quick function to ensure blog folder exists. And you know what? We're now getting into the territory where it might be more hygienic to go ahead and start breaking up this file into multiple module files as well. Because we have these utility functions down at the bottom. Maybe they ought to be in a util.js. So why don't we go ahead and do that? It's a perfect chance to get more familiar with ES modules. So I'm going to create a new folder that's util.js. I'm going to take these functions I'm using, cut them out, move them over. And I'm going to export every one of these functions. So now, I want to use this validate blog post and assert blog folder exists. I want to use these two functions inside of my index.js, so I need to import them. And this is how you do that. I'll say from, and then util.js. And that's a local module import there. So let's go ahead and finish writing this assert blog folder exists method. Let's see, there's a couple ways we could do this. We could use the stat function, and if the answer comes back that there's nothing there, then we run the make directory function. And if it says that there's a file at the /blog location, then we probably have to abort, because that's kind of a catastrophic failure. Because I don't want to delete the blog file. So let's go with that. So I'm going to do try. Okay, so I'm going to call the stat function on the blog location, /blog. If there is nothing there, that'll throw an exception. And so we need to call await archive.make directory at that location. Okay, simple. Meanwhile, if the stat function does return, we need to make sure that what got returned is a directory. If so, we're good. But if not, I'm going to think. I need to throw outside of this try. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do varst out here. And put this logic here. Okay, so now we have this function to make sure that the /blog directory exists. Finally, things are getting actually pretty straightforward now. There's just one thing left to do on the post function, and that's just write the file. So let's do await this dot write file. And oh, you know, we may need to do more validation on the name on the slug of the blog post, because these are file paths, right? We want to use the slug attribute as the file name of the blog post. And if the slug included something like a slash, we could get into some weird territory where you end up writing the blog post to a different directory. So why don't I go ahead and show how we're going to use the slug, which is like this, right? Okay, that seems fine. Why don't I go ahead and finish writing the rest of this, which is json.stringify blog post. Okay, that's how we publish a blog post. Really easy. It's just reading and writing files. But let's jump back over to our validate function and give a little more validation on the slug. I'm going to do something really simple. I'm just going to write a regular expression which says you can only use letters and numbers for your slugs, and dashes. That makes sense. We could probably come up with nicer, more lenient rules, but this is a really straightforward set of rules that we know will work. So we'll do A through Z, 0 through 9, and dash are allowed. Let's see, and it's going to be case insensitive. And why don't I do it like this, because I know off the top of my head this will work. I'm going to put a plus at the end of that, and I've got a caret at the beginning and a $sign at the end. So what that should do, if I've got my regexes straight in my head right now, is say I want to match this regex so that at the start all the way to the end you have A through Z, 0 through 9 are dashes, and nothing else. So I just take that regex and I do assert that test. So assert slug regex.test on the slug attribute, and that slug can only contain letters, numbers, and a dash. All right, well, since I'm not feeling 100% confident about my regex here, why don't I show how I would become confident about it. There's a very useful tool. In fact, there's a lot of good regex tools out there, but the one that I like to use is regex101.com. It's a really good way to basically debug and develop regular expressions. So you put in your regular expression up in the input at the top, and then you can put these test strings inside of the area underneath. So I could do foo bar 0, right? Okay, this is all looking right in. Up, there's that dot, doesn't accept it. Okay, same thing I'm guessing with, yep, as soon as we get any sort of character that's not what we specified, it stops matching, which you can tell because it stops having that color. So I think our regular expression is good. I'm going to ship it. Okay. Michael reads, great to have you. I will be happy to share the data address at the end. I mean, in fact, it should end up being this data address right here. So pauls-blog-module.hashbase.io. In fact, it looks like some people are already getting on it because I've got more than one peer. This module may not be the most useful module you ever seen, but hey, happy for everybody to use it. Let's see. Thank you. Eric just pointed out a typo. Joshua Mir, that's correct. That's the right address. So Eric just correctly pointed out that I've called it assert blog folder exists inside of util.js, and ensure blog folder exists inside of index, and ensure is actually what I want to do because it's not an assertion. I'm actually making changes. So I'm going to call it ensure blog folder exists. Thank you, Eric, for that catch. Sam is asking, what happens if you post to the same slug? Is this an update/upsert? It would be a put, so you would replace whatever is there. We could make it an update. but that would require a little bit more work, so I'm not going to do that. But yeah, if you wanted to make it an update, what you could do is try to read the file at the location, parse the JSON, and then merge together the two objects, and then you'd be all set. So, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to make it a put. It's just going to overwrite whatever is at the slug. Eric correctly pointed out that I misspelled stringify. I'm sure there will be other typos as we go, and that's what that test suite is going to be so helpful for later. But I think we're pretty much there, right? That's the post function right there, really straightforward. Make sure the blog post object that we're trying to publish is correctly shaped. Make sure that the folder exists that we're trying to write to, and then just write the file. Let's get into the list function. A lot of ways we could do a list function. The most basic thing that we want to do is list out all the JSON files inside of the blog folder. So we're going to do a read dir for that. And then we're going to filter down the file names to just JSON files. Okay. Now we could just roll with that, right? That's going to give us a list of post names. So it would basically give us a set of strings, an array of strings, that look like this, right? And that would be what list post does. That's one option. I think it might be more helpful to get some information about the individual blog posts, because what I would probably want to use list posts for is to do like the home page of my website, and I want to see the full listing of all the titles and the dates that they were published and all that. So why don't we do this? Why don't we, after getting the file names, iterate through the file names list, read each file, and pull out the metadata from the JSON that we want. So to do that, I'm just going to do a for let file name of file names. I'm going to do a loop, and I'm going to do let file content equals await this dot read file blog file name, and then why don't I wrap this in a try just in case. Then I'm going to parse the file content. And now I need to decide what to do with the content. Well, let's create another array here called posts. And then we're going to do posts.push. And let's pull out the attributes we want, which will be slug, which we're actually writing to the file right now. So let's just go ahead and pull it out of the file. And we'll take the title. What else did we put in these things? Content and date, so just the date. We'll catch, and let's see. We have a couple of options here. How do we want to deal with a failed file read? And there's a couple of things that could happen here. Technically, it's possible that one of these files could get deleted after read dir is called. It's not likely, but it is possible because we're not locking the files or anything like that. Another possibility, and this one's much more likely, is that one of the blog posts would have bad JSON. Some character gets messed up, causes a syntax error, and causes the parsing to fail. I think probably the best way to deal with that would be to do a let's do a console.error. Or no, actually, I'd say maybe a console.debug would be the right move, right? Errors seem like, an error occurred. This is something that we are going to ignore, but as the person making the site, I would want to notice whenever I access my site in the logs, oh, you know what, something's gone wrong. But for the most part, what we're going to do is handle it by just ignoring the bad post and just doing a console.debug, letting us know, okay, one of the files failed to read. So I'll do console.debug, failed to read blog post. I'll put out the name, file name, and include the error. No big deal, we'll just move on with our lives. And then at the end we return the posts. Okay, there's our list post function. So again, the algorithm is we read the file names inside of the blog directory, filter it down so that we're only reading the JSON files. We iterate every one of those file names and we read the file, parse its JSON, and pull out the attributes that we want to include in the listing. As a result, we end up with an array with a slug, title, and date for every published blog post. Okay, so now let's implement getPost. Should be pretty obvious how this one works. We're going to, in fact, I'm just going to copy some of the code that I used before, because at the end of the day, all I really need to do here is read the file based on the slug, parse the JSON, return that, and I'm done. So I'm going to take this slug and add the .json at the end, and then I'm just going to do return json.parse. There you go. There's a couple of other things we could do here if we wanted to. For instance, it might be smart to actually call validate blog post after reading the file. Because technically I don't know how that file got into the archive. It could be missing attributes that I consider to be required for a blog post to work. So if I wanted to do that, I could do something like this. File content equals json.parse, and then run this validate blog post call on the file content. That way, as somebody consuming getPost, I know that if something comes out of getPost, it's a valid blog post. And if it's not valid, it's going to throw whenever it tries to do the read. And honestly, I think that's a good idea. So I'm going to keep that here, and I'm also going to add that to the list posts call before. Seems like a smart move. And then finally, I'm going to return the file content. Okay, one last method. Very, very easy, this one. It's just an an unlink call, which is how you delete files. Oh. And you just need to get the path right, which is easy to do. And there you have it. Okay, something else just occurred to me. We actually need to be validating these slug parameters as they come in, because again, something could go wrong. You might have a slash in there that you weren't expecting to have. And if somebody could trick your application into running this method, it's unlikely that something bad would happen, but it's good to be safe. So let's create another validation function. And it's just going to be the exact same logic here. And I need to import it and just call it on these two functions. Okay, now we're a little safer. All right, and the crazy thing is I think we're done. I think that's our module. So what's a good way to test this guy? Well, I think there's always a pretty classic method, which is just to open up a REPL and start using it on yourself. But now that I think about it, I can't do ES module imports in the REPL yet in the dev tool, so that's not going to fly. Let's see. I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another DAT site, and I'm going to import this API into that DAT site. Seems like a good idea. So create a new tab here, create a new website. Call it my blog module test site. I'll set a local directory so I can work with it inside of Sublime. All right, there's that folder. Copy that path, jump over to... Okay, now here is a really important step for anybody intending to use ES modules. Let's take out some of this default stuff here. All right, so folks should be familiar with this bit of HTML right here. It's a script tag. It's what brings in this script right here. But if we want to use ES modules, which we do, and why don't I go ahead and kick that off by copying and pasting the import. Right now, this isn't going to work when I try to open it. And let's just prove that to be the case by testing it. Unexpected token import. Why did that just happen? Well, because ES modules are sort of an opt-in feature. They're new, and I'm guessing for some reason they felt like it was important that they have an explicit opt-in. Must have had something to do with the semantics of the import calls, or a possibility that import was being used by applications and could confuse things if you just automatically assumed the keyword did what it was supposed to do. So anyway, you got to opt in. And the way you do that is by setting the type to module. If I refresh, oh, we got a bug, but it's not using the import. It's probably some kind of error in my blog module that I was working on earlier. So we'll fix that in a second. Now let me check right here. Eric is asking, when you unlink the file, does it still exist as a version in the owner's DAT, but does not exist in any peers who seeded the DAT? So let's see. So DAT is versioned, as we were talking about before. And So DATs are versioned, and right now the policy is that Beaker just retains every version of a file in your history right now. That's the policy. So if you delete something, technically it doesn't get deleted. It's removed from the current version of the DAT site, but the file gets retained in your history. That's what we do right now. In the future, I want to make it so that you have a little more control, where you can say, you know, I don't want to keep everything in the history, but I want to keep like the files at this tag of v1.0.0. So eventually, that it may not be the case that a deleted file is completely gone, but for the moment, I think I may have mangled that. But anyway, for the moment, if you delete something, it retains in your history, but it's gone from the current version if somebody looks at the site. That means that if somebody has visited the site and never saw a file that you deleted, they may still have it in their local cache. So they may still have access to it. It's not going to show up unless they go through the history, but everybody can do that. The history tools are built into Beaker. So people will be able to find deleted files right now. There's some conversation around that too about, like, you know, sometimes you really want to delete something and just kind of ask everybody, please just purge this file, get it out of your history, whatever. So we may end up we've talked about maybe creating a kind of a special delete, which is like a stronger delete, where you're like, you know, look, I want this thing gone. This is a problematic file, and then it's up to everybody's clients to honor that request or not. Okay, but before we get into strong deletes and what have you, let's debug the code that I'm working on now. Unexpected reserved word. Okay. Now, I think this is probably a bug inside of the blog module. Now there's a bug that I can see right away here, and that is that I forgot to export the blog module. So let's do that first. Okay, that's important to do. Let's see if it made any difference in my code over here. No, it didn't. And this, unfortunately, when you click on that right now, this is what Electron gives us. It just shows us when they decided to throw the syntax error. Not very helpful. Okay, unexpected reserved word. Okay, well, let's start by, we're going to have to do some process of elimination debugging here. Because I don't think anything inside of this file, I don't think there's anything wrong here. This all looks right to me. So probably there's something wrong in here. Really straightforward way to begin to answer that is to completely clear out everything in it. So I just did a cut of everything. And I'm just going to export a function called blog module so that it does exist. and see what happens when I try to import this. Yeah, okay, that worked, right? So we know that there's something wrong. There's some kind of syntax error inside of the blog module. So I'm going to go ahead and undo all those changes. Now let's see, an unexpected reserved word. Sometimes that can be because of an await call that's inside of a non-async function. And lo and behold, right here, the ensure blog folder exists function is async. We have these await keywords used inside of it, but we didn't tag the function as async, like that. That's what we were needing. That should have fixed the bug, fingers crossed. Yes, okay. The blog module now works correctly. I was able to import it. So maybe I don't know if it works correctly, but at least there's no syntax error. So let's go ahead and instantiate a version of it. And I like to do, I like to wait for the load command, so I'm going to do And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this blog variable to the window so that I can then access it from DevTools and start to play around with it and test it. This is definitely one of my preferred ways to test out a module like this, is just to, again, get it into a REPL somewhere, run the functions, make sure they all work. Once I'm happy with everything, then I write the automated tests so that I'm sure that it doesn't break in the future. So I'm going to do window.blog equals blog, save it. And what we should see is that output about the current listing of posts, which should be an empty array because I haven't posted anything yet. Okay. Okay. This is why it's good to test. We got a file not found. This is because there's no blog folder yet. So if you look inside of the list posts function, we do a redir on blog. Well, blog doesn't exist right now. And so it's just telling us, you know, not found. You can't do that. So there's two things we could do here. One is we could do an ensure blog folder exists call. It's an option. Would also be a good idea to do that on remove post because technically the same kind of bug could occur, but then that's not really so important because if the blog folder doesn't exist, then the post isn't going to exist. So you're going to get a not found error either way. So I don't need to worry about it here. I feel a little bit weird about calling ensure blog folder exists on list posts because that's a mutation of the files. And list post is supposed to just read information. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this redir in a try catch. And if it fails, I'm going to assume, maybe for better or for worse, I'm going to assume that it just means that the blog folder doesn't exist, and I'll handle that by returning an empty array. So let's wrap this in a try. And then if that happens, we're just going to ignore that. File names will stay an empty array, and everything else will effectively have no result, no effect, and we'll end up returning this empty posts array. So let's give this theory a shot. And there we go. Okay, problem solved. Well, let's find out if my blog post publishing function works correctly. Blog.post. First things first, let's find out if it correctly catches my bug or a bad input. Actually, let's start with blog.post and no input. Okay, validator caught that much. How about an empty object? Okay, it's correctly seeing that we're missing attributes. That's all good news. Let's go ahead and construct a well-formed post. I'm going to take out the B until I'm done writing this, just in case. Ha! Knew I would do that. Okay. I think we're ready. Let's give it a shot. And I'm going to change this to a then and console.log both results. All right, seemed to work. Let's refresh the page. Current posts, we got an entry. There it is. The post function worked. Let's take a look. There's the blog folder, hello world.json. There's the data. Okay, so far so good. Let's just test a couple of the other functions real fast. Let's do a blog.getPost hello-world. Looks right. Finally, let's see what happens if we remove it. Yeah, okay. So things are looking pretty good. We've got this module published, and it works exactly like the index.markdown tells you it does. That's good news. Let's see, what should our next step be? I guess from here, the next thing to do is to go ahead and get the test suite going. And so that means we're going to get Testify involved. Okay, so this is kind of fun. I needed a test runner. And most test runners in JavaScript right now are Node-based, Node.js-based. For my money, I like Ava the most. That's what I've been using for a while. Sometimes I also use Tape. I had no interest in making my own test runner, but the reality is that there was nothing that really fit the Beaker and data ecosystem like I wanted it to, so I had to make my own. It was a good experience, I guess. So, oh, wrong browser. So let's take a look at the Testify website real fast so we can see what we're working with. Okay. So, as you can see, I haven't put a whole lot of design time into this, but the idea is that this is a DAT site. Let's get it on DAT, not HTTPS. This is a DAT site. It's all client-side, as with almost every other DAT application. You're going to give it the URL of a test script that you want it to run. And then it's going to run those tests and give you the output on the page. Pretty straightforward. So to test this, or to demonstrate it, how about, I have this link right here, which takes us to its own test suite, right? Because I had to have a test suite for the test suite. So hit start, and there it goes, right? You see the results being output below. This test was supposed to fail. These were some skipped tests, and so on and so forth. So, cool. We need to write some tests for the blog module. The way we're going to do this is, in the blog module DAT archive, we're going to write tests.js. And I'm going to steal the example real fast so that we can have something. Okay. So this is the example test suite for Testify. What you do is you just export a default function that takes in the test method. And that test method is going to give you all the tools you need to run the tests. What Testify does is it loads up this JavaScript file and then executes it and outputs the results of the test suite for you to look at on the page. So if I go back to the blog module and tests.js, or was it singular? No, it's plural. All right, so there it is right there, right? That's the thing I just copied and pasted. So I put this into the URL and hit start, and there it is. All right, there are my tests being run by Testify. Let me make a quick change. And run it again. Tests work as expected. Okay, so here's my test runner running the tests that are published under the blog module. So let's get some real tests going. To do this, I need to be able to create a data archive that I can read and write. And there's a mechanism for this inside of Testify. And I've got to go over to this other test that I wrote to copy and paste, because who remembers what they've done? All right. So I'm going to create a test blog archive. And I am going to use this little method right here. In fact, I want to copy all that. And we'll call this the blog module test archive. And we'll import our API into the test. And let's start with a test for blog.post. And we'll do await as equals await test blog.post. And so what's going to happen whenever we run this is that Testify is going to ask us to create an archive, because it has to always ask for permission to create archives. I'll give it permission. It'll run the tests, and then it's going to ask me to delete the archive because we don't need that anymore, and it still needs to ask permission to delete archives as well. So let's refresh and run. All right, there it asks for permission. Grant that. And now we got to delete it. Okay, but something went wrong. I made a copy and paste mistake. Fix that. Let's try it again. Oh, I got to refresh. Hey Christian, it's good to see you. Glad you made it while we were live. Okay, so try it again. Okay, still failing, invalid dat URL. That's probably a complaint about this. Fix that bug again. Okay, now it's working. That's good news. So, why don't we just write a couple of more tests? Not going to go crazy on this because, you know, this isn't real. You know, what I would do next is these tests are getting run sequentially, so it would make a lot of sense to do like a test of .getPost, and so that's going to be like var post equals await test blog.getPost post 1, and I'm going to do t.is post.slug post 1, and is the right? It's t.assert. No, not t.assert. t.equal. And let's check the title and content. That would be what I would do, but I'm just going to comment these guys out because I don't want to waste everybody's time. And then I would do like a list posts check as well. List. And, you know, post 0 slug should be what we expect. And let's just run these real fast, make sure it all works. All right, cool. Tests are passing. So the final step that I would do here, if I was working on blog module and using Testify as my way of having the tests, this is pretty cool, I think. I can actually link to this test suite and this input by copying the URL up here. So I'm going to go to the index.md for the blog module, and I'm going to do links tests, and I'm just going to copy that in, right? And you can see it's got some of that percent encoding because it has to do that, but this is a link to the test suite inside of Testify. So I save that, and now if anybody ever wanted to make sure that blog module is passing its tests, you click on this link and then just run the tests themselves. I think that's pretty cool. There you have it. Okay, ES modules published on DAT. There you have it. I think, first of all, that's right at the hour mark, so I'm feeling good about that. But second of all, I think that's pretty much everything I could tell you that's interesting about ES modules on DAT. I guess we could talk about versioning and stuff, but we talked about that earlier. So yeah, if anybody has any questions about how all this works, happy to answer them. We can hang out for a little bit. And if anybody else has any questions just about DAT or Beaker or some kind of problem they're stuck on maybe for something they're building, anything like that, happy to answer them. Oh. Sem asks, would the ES modules on DAT also work when used in conjunction with Homebase, e.g. for non-Beaker users? So specifically what I think you're referring to is an HTTP mirroring of a DAT site. So they would work in some cases. If you use an ES module like, let's see, I'll just create a new file here. I'll just clean this one out. If you use an ES module like this, that's going to work on both DAT and HTTPS, so the home-based version, the mirroring of your DAT site would work just fine. And I think it should be pretty obvious why, because it's not referring to a specific protocol there, it's just referring to a relative URL. Of course, it's not going to work once you start bringing in the DAT URL itself. So once you do this, now you're not going to be able to work with the HTTP mirror because I would assume the browser you're using doesn't support DAT yet. Now there's a couple of things that we can do about this. None of them are written in stone, but this conversation has been actually kind of building lately about like how do we make the DAT ecosystem play nice with the HTTP ecosystem. And I'm beginning to think that's actually pretty important because I want people to be able to see my stuff even if they're not into the DAT world. And I think everybody else feels roughly the same way. So how do we fix this? Well, there's a couple things we could do. One thing we could do technically is run some kind of search and replace inside of Homebase where we look for DAT URLs and replace them with HTTP URLs. It would be kind of like a live build step in a way. Could definitely do that. Could also have the developer run a build step which bundles everything together so that none of these URLs are being pulled live from where you are importing from, but instead it gets bundled into a single JS file. That would be pretty sensible as well. It would be sensible because not only is that a good way to circumvent this problem of making it work on HTTP, but it would also improve performance even on DAT, and you would also have absolutely no concern about which version of what you're getting. So if you haven't pinned your ES imports to a specific version, the bundle is basically going to pin it for you. So having the developer run a build step in that scenario does make sense. It's not my favorite though, because I'm trying to get away from build steps, but it's an option. Option number 3, a little more speculative, but not totally crazy. We've been talking about this idea of DAT mounts, or sometimes they're called DAT symlinks. And we actually haven't settled on a name because we haven't totally settled on what exactly this proposal needs to be. But the idea here is it would be really cool if you could embed a DAT inside of another DAT as a folder. So for example, wouldn't it be nice if I could say at the /vendor/blog module, that is a pointer to the DAT Paul's blog module.hashbase.io, right? Like mounting Paul's blog module to /vendor/blog module. Interesting thing here, first of all, what would happen is rather than writing your import from a full URL, you would write it off of that mounted directory. Like this. Which is almost starting to feel like what Node Modules does for Node.js, right? And that's a pretty good thing because now, rather than writing out the full URL on every source file in my project, I can be using these relative mounted URLs. And then I could actually change that mounted URL's destination in one place and have it affect all the source files. So there's a level of indirection. That level of indirection is especially useful when you start thinking about version management, right? So let's say I want to make sure that I'm only using v1.0.0 of Paul's blog module across all my source files. I would pin the version on that mount. And now I know anytime I'm referring to that mount, I'm referring to a specific version, right? So that would be probably a pretty good solution for upstream dependencies in general. And you could even have multiple versions pinned at once, right? So like I could do -v2 and pin that to the v2 version of the DAT. And as the final benefit, Homebase actually could just have this stuff happening up inside of Homebase, and all of these other DATs that are mounted would be referred to by their mount paths, and it's completely compatible with the HTTPS version. So I think these are all actually pretty decent solutions. The worst solution by far is having Homebase search and replace DAT URLs. That seems like it's a recipe for riddle code. The pre-build step seems like a pretty sensible solution and is probably what I would recommend today if you needed a solution right now. But the mounting thing, that's pretty exciting. It's also got all kinds of different benefits for cool composition when you're like making a website and you want to have users of your website that are just other people. You could mount their data archives onto your data archive, and now they just own these subfolders. And now you get some cool permissioning schemes out of it. So there's a lot of potential use in these mounts, and so that's why I think we're probably going to do it. But the mounts are similar to the multi-writer. They're going to take a little bit of work, and we're focused so much on getting the authoring tools right inside of Beaker right now. I'm not really sure when we're going to get that into the roadmap. Hopefully soon. Let's see. Eric asks, how about embedding Beaker inside of Firefox when the user requests a DAT URL? Well, what we would need actually is to be able to make a plugin for Firefox so that it can support DAT. And it's not possible yet, but I know there are people at Firefox working to make something like that possible, so you never know. I think that would be great. We would love to get the DAT tool set inside of these other browsers. So we'll keep you all updated on how that goes and what happens there. And hey Mix, it's great to see you on the live stream. Glad you're here. Hate to say it, I think you missed most of the content, but still good to see you. We still have plenty of time for questions, so if anybody has questions about ES modules or anything about DAT or Beaker or anything else, feel free to ask. Let's see. Mix is asking, do we have people that we're doing testing with, like artists? Well, first of all, I can tell you we definitely have some artists using Beaker. I think there seems to be a really cool zine scene showing up on Beaker, which is awesome. I just this weekend started asking people to do user interviews, recording themselves using Beaker. And Mix, I know you've always pushed me to do that, and it's always useful, and this was no exception. So I've been thinking a lot more about doing more user interviews and making sure that everything's very clear. It's always so surprising whenever you see somebody actually sit down with what you're working on, not just because you don't know how they feel or what's confusing to them. That's a big part of it. But even just like you forget about pathways or flows. That's just not your daily flow, right? Like if I didn't do these user tests, the flows that I do would work great, but I wouldn't have every flow covered, and that's what these user interviews are so good at surfacing. And it is a strong motivator to watch somebody struggle with your own software, I'll tell you that. So hopefully, I'll be able to do some more of that. Mix is saying, I know a few zinesters who are pumped by Beaker, and I was wondering if you take direction on what you were prioritizing based on who's using what. We definitely do, and that's sort of been, for a while we spent some time kind of just making sure we understood what the tools need and where we were going in a broad sense. But now more than ever, I think we've been talking more to users and kind of trying to zone in on what people are doing now. And so if anybody ever wants to talk to us about that, you can get a hold of us by email, by GitHub issues, by Twitter, on IRC. We are here to have that conversation. And hopefully we'll be doing a good job of listening to folks. Cosmic says, I've been having problems with my web page crashing while building it. Any ideas, or is it just you? Well, it wouldn't surprise me, I'll tell you that. Cosmic, if you want to open up an issue on GitHub, if that's possible for you, if you're familiar with GitHub, I would be more than happy to help you out there. If the thing is crashing, I mean, that sounds like a bug on our end, not on yours. So I can both try to solve the bug and maybe give you a workaround to avoid the problem. But if GitHub doesn't work for you, you can email me. Let me know in the chat here if anything's a problem with that. Christian asks, how is the experimental/testing phase of the library and DatPeers API going? Do you foresee any change of direction or challenges happening to them? I think DatPeers, well, unfortunately, we screwed up. The recent version of Beaker had a bug, which Christian, you know well about, with using these APIs. You couldn't have a DNS name on your application and use DatPeers. That was a silly bug to have. We got that fixed and should have the fixed version published soon, so that will kind of unblock the problem. So far, I haven't gotten a whole lot. We haven't built enough of a sort of feedback cycle about any of those APIs to know that we're going to make changes yet. We're open to hearing what everybody has to say. I know that one of the biggest limitations with DAT peers is that you can only talk to peers that are on the exact same DAT as you are. And that limitation will probably be the biggest sort of roadblock to DAT peers being a really useful API. But it's also sort of an important limitation that we had to ride with for the moment. So I am interested to hear just how bad that limitation is and react to it. But for the most part, honestly, my focus lately has been mainly on improving the core UX of Beaker, making sure that the authoring tools are 100% what they need to be, which if anybody's been following along, we've really battled back and forth with ideas like workspaces and stuff like that in the staging area, trying to make sure we're getting those tools right. Um, and I feel really good about the direction we're going right now. I haven't shown any of that yet, but we are bringing back something similar to the staging area, but with some improvements that hopefully kind of resolve those open questions we've had around the authoring tools. And and then once all the core pieces are done and we feel like people aren't getting thrown off just because of bad UI to do the basic activities, then we'll get back into some of those experimental APIs, see how that's going with folks, adopt any changes there. Cosmic, I see you'll open a request later. That's great. I'll talk to you on GitHub. How are we doing on time? It's about 3:20, so that's an hour and 20 minutes. I'm cool hanging out a little bit longer. So why don't we just chill for a sec? Eric points out that John Kyle is doing interesting artistic work with DAT, and that is very true. Love talking with John. He always has interesting things to say and ideas to share, so I definitely recommend checking out John Kyle's work anytime he publishes something on DAT. Cosmic asks if anybody is building DAT sites with A-frame. I don't know. I don't think so. I certainly haven't seen anything, and I'm not really sure if Beaker is 100% compatible with A-frame. Just don't know. But I'll tell you, I think it's going to be a great match, A-frame and Beaker. I mean, VR in general and DAT is going to be fantastic because, I think you want virtual spaces to be owned by the people that create them, and so I think that's going to be a pretty good fit. Why don't we say we'll wrap it up in 10 minutes or so? So we'll put a hard limit at 3:30. We'll call it a day. Mix, it is awesome to see you as always. I'll catch you online. So Joshua says, as far as I know, there's no stable lower level representation of DAT archives. Am I wrong? As in, is hyper something plus networking, DAT is hyper something plus networking magic, but it's changing to be hyper something else and magic. I want to mess around with the lower level stuff. Yeah. Yeah, the DAT stack is evolving, and we do, first of all, I want to say we do want to expose some of the lower level stuff even inside of Beaker. The core piece of DAT is an append-only log structure known as hypercore. An append-only log you can use to build so many different things. It's a really powerful tool. In fact, Cabal is a chat program that started out on HyperDB and then eventually went down to using hypercore directly to get more flexibility. So the power of hypercore is so much, it's kind of like it would be crazy not to open that up to end users. But then everything between hypercore and the DAT archive, yeah, there's a lot of kind of work happening there. A lot of it is Matthias either improving upon the performance of DAT and doing, frankly, an incredible job at that, or he's, it's stuff like multi-writer. And I think probably what we're going to see happen is we will probably, with Beaker, take multi-writer all the way to the point that it needs to be, and then and then maybe we'll start to break out the inner pieces a little bit more to the ecosystem. And there's really the reason for that mainly just has to do with the time that we have available to get the roadmap working correctly. My thinking is we should make sure that the higher level pieces work really well before we start opening up the lower level pieces. And not everybody agrees with that. I think there's a valid, observation to make that it would be, while the higher level stuff is getting shaped up, maybe open up the lower level stuff so that hardcore hackers can mess around with it. But we decided to go with the high level stuff first. So we'll hopefully get all that stuff into your hands sooner than later. Benjamin asks, I've been building an e-commerce app for digital music. Would it be possible to host files on a DAT folder that can only be accessed by users who paid for the files? Not impossible. That's a possibility of that. You're going to have to come up with some kind of scheme of either encrypting it or only letting people who have paid connect to the DAT swarm. We haven't built any tools yet that would make that easy to do, so I feel like you would have to do some pretty heavy work on your own to make something like that happen right now. I suspect that the ecosystem is going to have better tools for that kind of thing over time, but right now I would say like you're looking at some novel dev work to make a scheme like that happen. I would dedicate some time to help you out with that if I had it, but we're just gonna have to get there when we get there. CRS says you have a problem with the Windows version of Beaker can't load up. We've been getting some reports of problems with Windows. I keep on telling users just to switch to Mac, but I don't know if that's gonna fly. So yeah. CRS, if you could open up an issue, I would be happy to look into it and try to help. Let me know if you're able to use GitHub. If not, I can point you at other ways to get in touch with me, and we can talk more about debugging that issue, because I definitely want to get it working for you. But I just don't think that the YouTube live stream is the right place to debug. So GitHub issue if you know how to do that, and if not, say so, and we can get my email to you or something like that. Cosmic, I don't know what the ExoKit engine is, so if you could tell me what it is, maybe I could answer that. Christian says it would be nice to have an API that allows DAT sites to encrypt messages with the user's DAT public key. I agree completely. I am not enough of a crypto engineer to tell you that yes, 100% I know that can, I don't know what happens with key reuse, if there's something that you need to be concerned about there, but you could definitely publish a key in your DAT that could be used for encryption. So I'm fairly sure that it's pretty straightforward to do. And yeah, I agree, that would be awesome. I mean, as soon as we can get end-to-end encryption integrated into the stack, it's going to open up all sorts of cool use cases. I also think we need to have access control on the networking layer too, so that you can say only Christian can access this DAT that I made because it's just for us. Security and privacy should be a defense in depth thing, and end-to-end encryption is just one of the many pieces, and it's going to be really fun when it's there. But yeah, that's just another one of those pieces. We got to get the basics right first, and then we'll get that encryption in there at some point. Power Source asks, what's the current plan / status on improving privacy? Yeah, speaking of making sure the basics are right. I suspect that what you're referring to is the privacy around which DATs you're accessing. DAT is a peer-to-peer network. It's a lot like BitTorrent. To find data on the DAT network, you have to talk to a registry of other peers. You have to say, hey, who out there has datbeakerbrowser.com? And then you get a listing, and then you talk to those peers, which is, it's pretty cool. We do a few things to try to give you some modicum of privacy, but the reality is that if somebody else is on beakerbrowser.com, they'll be able to know that you're downloading it too. That's something that we often call reader privacy, right? I'm reading beakerbrowser.com, and right now we don't have any good reader privacy. And it's something that we take pretty seriously. It's kind of a big question. There have been different kinds of suggestions, like maybe you need to use Tor or I2P, and we're taking those suggestions seriously and looking into them. We actually have been planning to improve on the infrastructure for this process. This is what you call peer discovery, or just discovery, right? Discovering peers that have the content, so discovery. And we want that to work. There's really two issues. The first thing that we need to do is get it to be more reliable. It is not reliable enough yet. That's the first problem. The second problem is its privacy question. And they both actually sort of landed on our laps right at the same time. And so we've sort of been sitting and evaluating our options for both of those problems. On the matter of reader privacy, I'm beginning to think the likely answer, the most pragmatic answer, will end up being to have people use proxies. There are a lot of trade-offs to proxies. If you're using a proxy and you have to explicitly opt into using a proxy, it's not automatically available for everybody then. That means that there's basically going to be two kinds of people who haven't set up their proxy yet and people who have. I don't love that. I think that everybody ought to have a base level of privacy. If some people have it, then everybody should. But it may be the most realistic solution for us in the near term. But like I said, we're looking into it. We're definitely interested in we take it very seriously. So we want to get it right. And so we're not where we want to be yet, but we're looking at it and looking for the best way to go at it. All right, so Cosmic says that ExoKit engine is an HTML JavaScript engine that runs regular websites but only supports 3D via WebGL and WebXR. A window in ExoKit is just the contents of a WebGL canvas. So is ExoKit like a WebVR mechanism for looking at web pages inside of a three-dimensional space? Because it kind of sounds like that. CRS, okay, GitHub works fine, great. Please do go ahead and file that issue. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. I've gotten a little bit less on point with responding to GitHub issues lately, just because I got a lot going on, but I'm still catching every one of them. Not going to let any of them go. Yeah, Eric is correct. There's been a couple of blog posts on the blog.datproject.org talking about reader privacy. Yeah, it's definitely something that we've been talking about and thinking heavily about. Cosmic says, yes, it displays an application. Yeah, I haven't tried it. If ExoKit runs entirely with WebGL, then really the question ends up being how good of WebGL support is inside of Beaker. And, we use Electron, so some things don't work as well as they normally would, and WebGL might be one of them. I haven't spent a lot of time with it. So, stretch goal right there. Yeah, it was great hanging out with you, Benjamin. Where are we at? We're at 3:35. I think that was, we're 5 minutes past that cutoff time I set, so I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. But thank you, everybody, for coming. This has been fun as always. We're going to do it again next week, so tune in then. And if you want to get in touch with me, as always, you can find me on Twitter, find me on GitHub, send me an email, and we also have an IRC channel on Freenode. It's #SpeakerBrowser. So thank you all so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.